Hello and welcome to another 3 palettes, 3 looks video. In case you're new here, my name is Noopur and I love indie makeup and all things color and sparkle, and thank you so much for clicking on this video. So you guys already know which palettes I'm using based on the title of this video, but I do want to mention that after every look, I'm going to spend some time showing you guys swatches and talking about my overall thoughts on the palettes, letting you know what the textures and the formulas in the palette are like, all of that good stuff. I try to use palettes that I haven't done dedicated videos for these 3 palettes, 3 looks videos, so I can still give you kind of a mini overview and a closer look at the palette just in case you are interested in them. And of course, there will be timestamps down below in case you want to jump around depending on which palettes you're interested in. One last thing before we get into the looks, I did receive all of these palettes that I'm talking about today in PR, and I believe I have affiliate codes with a couple of the brands, so I will leave that information down in the description box. For the first look, I'm going to be using the Shellwe Misty Spirit palette, which has a fully removable cover, and I'll talk a little bit more about how I feel about that later, but you can see that it's a mostly matte palette aside from these 2 cream shadows at the bottom. I don't know how obvious that is, and again, I will talk about this later, but I'm going to be sticking to the matte shades, and as much as I am sure a lot of you would like to see me do a fully matte look, I will be pulling some shimmer shadows in after I finish with the mattes. And now that I have some eyeshadow on, I always like to let you know, just in case you're new to my channel, how I do my tutorials. So I'm going to be doing the application on this eye, but I'll already have the step completed on this eye. That way you can see what I'm working towards. So I'm going to be starting by picking up this light grayish blue matte over here, and I don't know if you can tell, I think you can on camera, there's quite a bit of kick up in the pan when I swirl my brush in there, which is pretty typical for Shellwe's matte formula. It doesn't bother me, I just make sure to tap off my brush pretty well. So I'm starting by running this through my crease, but I'm keeping it pretty high up. I'm not taking it super deep into the socket or onto the lid because I am actually going to be putting mattes all over my lid before I move on to shimmers. But I'm just slowly building this to give the darker shades that I'm going to be putting on next something to blend into. I'm also lightly applying it here on the outer corner. I might do some more later to perfect the blend, but just a little bit for now. I dipped back in one more time, but very, very little because these eyeshadows are super pigmented. This is actually a new matte formula for Shellwe, if I'm not mistaken, and full disclosure, I tried doing this look yesterday and it was a massive fail. I don't know what possessed me to do a technique on camera that I haven't done in a really long time, and it's the technique of working from dark eyeshadows to light eyeshadows, and I only really do that if I'm putting a dark shadow all over my lid and then blending it out with a lighter shade. But I started with a dark shade in my crease, in the socket, and then I started blending it out with this light gray shade, and it went so badly, but in the process, I did learn that these eyeshadows are super, super pigmented. And I think that's part of how these eyeshadows are a new formula, because in my experience in the past with Shellwe mattes, they just took a few layers to build up to opacity and they were a little difficult to blend out, but these are blending out very, very easily, but they're also super pigmented, so I think you do have to be a little careful to go in with light layers, at least if you have a blending style that's close to mine. I'm also working this eyeshadow along the lower lash line, mostly in this front portion over here, and then slowly moving it outwards, but I probably won't put too much pigment right on the outer edge over there. Now I'm going to dip into this slightly deeper blue-gray shade. So after using the shades in my usual way today, I have determined that it's not just the fact that I was doing a different technique yesterday, but it's this specific shade, or maybe it's all of the shades in the palette. They blend out very easily, which you would think is a good thing, but I feel like these are a little bit hard to control. It got out of hand so fast yesterday, and I do eyeshadow, quite a bit. I don't feel like I usually have a hard time with eyeshadows. I can make them work for the most part. And these aren't necessarily bad, but I do think that there's a bit of a learning curve here. I am being so careful with my movements here because yesterday, it went from here to all the way into my brow, just in 2 seconds. I just realized I had my fan on in the earlier clip. I'm turning it on and off here and there to kind of cool off in between filming because it's been so hot, but I'm sorry if there was any audio disturbance. But I ended up picking a little bit more up on the brush, and I'm trying to wedge it right here in the very deepest part of my crease, to the point where if I'm looking straight like this, it gets swallowed up in the crease. I'm trying to keep it right there, and I'm really not blending up at all. I'm just using the windshield wiper motions because, like I said, these eyeshadows travel and blend so easily. It's a little hard to keep them where I want them. I'm going to use that first brush right here on the outer corner with no additional pigment to blend this out just a little bit. And I'm not doing like this because, again, I'm not trying to spread it out anymore. I'm just doing like this C shape almost. Taking that same dark shade and running it right here on the lower lash line where I didn't put the lighter shade. And per usual, bringing it out here into the outer corner to make everything connected. Now I'm going to pick up this matte over here, which has a bit more of a purpley undertone compared to the other two mattes. I've swatched all of them here. It's the one in the middle, and you can see it compared to this other two, those look so much more blue. And I'm going to be applying this to the rest of my lid where there are no other mattes. I did dip in quite a bit with this shade because I want it to go on pretty pigmented. But then as there's less pigment on my brush, I'm feathering it into the other mattes to make sure they're all blended together. But I'm not too worried about how these are blending together because I am going to be covering things up with the shimmer. Now that I have quite a bit of smokiness going on, I'm going to bring in some shimmers, and I'm going to be using the Davini Dewdrops palette to start with. And I think this just restocked, so you can finally purchase it again. But I'm going to be using this shade up here called Drop, which was going viral some time ago because look at this. It's got such an intense blue glow. You can see that the eyeshadow doesn't have much of a base to it, which is why I wanted to lay down the gray eyeshadow all over my lid, just so that there's not like, you know, a blank space on my lid when the light's not hitting the eyeshadow. And also Davini shimmers have a little bit of emollients to them. They're not like overly emollient, but they have enough to where I don't find the need to put down a glitter primer underneath the shimmer, even though I already have a lot of mattes on my lid. Per usual, using a brush to get into areas where I can't be precise with my fingers, especially due to my long nails. But I mean, you can see how intense this shimmer is going on, and I definitely did not use a tacky primer. I feel like the shimmer is the perfect juxtaposition against the mattes that I use because the mattes are very deep and murky, while the shimmer is very much on the light side, but it's also very vibrant. And so even though this is technically a monochromatic look so far, these are both technically blue. They are so different, and I think it really helps create some dimension. But the thing about these electric blue type of shimmers is that they tend to be more glowy than they are sparkly. It's not that the shadow doesn't have any sparkle, but it's just not as sparkly as some other shades in my collection. So I'm going to do a little shade cascade layering combo, and I'm going to dip into the Glamlite Nearly Natural palette, and I'm going to be using the topper shimmer over here, Naked Eye, on a fluffy but slightly pointed brush. So I already went ahead and did it on this eye over here, and I'm not sure how much it's going to translate on camera, but hopefully you'll be able to see that this eye is now both sparklier, but also like a bit more frosty because that white silver sparkle did mix in with the blue layer. And I like to apply it with a fluffy brush like this so I don't put too much on because I do want that blue to shine through and I want the silver sparkle to be more of a dispersed layer. It just allows for more control and precision than using my finger. But it can also lead to more fallout, so just be careful when you're doing this. I also want to mention that I specifically reached for Naked Eye from Nearly Natural because I think it's the perfect shadow to layer with the Davini shade because Drop from the Dewdrops palette is super smooth with a very fine particle size. So I feel like I have other wet looking topper type of sparkly shades, like for example, Skin of a Killer from Bella Beauty Bar comes to mind, but that has a bit more of a textured finish. And I just feel like the sparkles really stand out against Drop. And I wanted the sparkles to more so blend in with the shadow. And this eyeshadow has such a fine particle size that I felt like it was perfect for the look. For my inner corner, I'm going back into Dewdrops and I'm picking up this shade over here called Splish. This shadow is so interesting because it's got that silvery white sparkle, but there are also little specks of pink all throughout it, which I think are such an interesting contrast with the silver. And also just a little bit of interesting contrast for the look because I did want to keep it primarily cool toned with more silver sparkle over here, but I think those little specks of pink just add a little something extra. Here's the final look, and I'll have the rest of my makeup details in the description box, but I'm very happy with it. I always love a good blue smoky eye, and I feel like it's been a minute since I did one, but let me switch you over to the sparkle cam so you can see all of this beautiful shimmer. Here's the sparkle cam, and I'm so happy because I think you can really see what I was talking about with the layer of silvery white sparkles over the blue sparkles. Oh, I love it. It's so, so beautiful. And then also in the inner corner, the inner swoop, the silver sparkles with the pop of pink. I just feel like that adds so much, like a little bit of contrast, not so much, but just a little bit, because it's a primarily cool tone look. And then you have those little pinpricks of pink that are just like, what's going on there? Okay, let me give you some quick thoughts on this palette. So first, I want to point out the packaging, specifically this artwork. Shellwe always does really beautiful artwork for their palettes, which I appreciate. And this one has, like, you can see some glossy bits over a matte background, which I think is really cool. And then also, as I showed you in the beginning, it has a fully magnetic removable cover. I think this is a really cool concept because unlike with regular cardboard packaging, you don't have the issue of trying to like bend it backwards and all of that. But in practice, I have found that this does not attach super securely onto here, and when I've been storing it even just stacked with other palettes, especially if you store it in a drawer, I can see this coming detached very easily as you're moving things around and then like accidentally digging a finger into one of the shades, which I almost did one time. We see this type of packaging with a lot of clear acrylic type of palettes that have the fully removable cover, but quite honestly, I never store my eyeshadows in these for the exact same reasons that I pointed out. I'm just too worried about the cover coming detached and the shadows just being exposed. I was very excited to see a mostly matte palette from Shellwe. I do enjoy Shellwe's shimmers quite a bit, but I was very intrigued by them launching a fully matte palette and also adding these two cream shadows in here. So I haven't tried out these cream shimmers yet. This is actually my first time using the mattes from this palette at all, except for the failure that I had yesterday. But I haven't worn the cream shadows yet, and I wanted to save that for a day where I'm not going anywhere and I'm not filming anything after, because I don't know how these are going to apply or where, like if they're going to crease or whatever. And I'm filming another video after this, so I need my makeup to last. Within the creams, we have one that's a slightly shimmery formula and then one that's more matte, like not in formula, but in terms of the color, like it's a matte maroon type of shade that looks like this, versus this one has some shimmer in it. I don't know if you'll really be able to see it just from this, but I am going to be showing you swatches at some point too. In terms of color story, I was immediately attracted to this layout because I feel like it's such an interesting combination of like muted murky tones, but there's like a good amount of variety within undertone as well as depth. I feel like you have a lot of pairings of eyeshadows. So for example, these two that I used today have like the blue undertone and you have a lighter and deeper shade. And then you have this one that has a lighter purple undertone and this one that's slightly darker. And then you have these that are more like warm grays almost. And again, you have a lighter one and a deeper one. And then these two are kind of like the odd ones out for me. They're warmer shades, but they're again kind of like more interesting murky tones, especially this one over here. So I do think the color story is like, I'm very attracted to it. But with the formula, I just found it a little difficult to work with. And maybe the other shades are not like that because I really only use these two in terms of like blending out. I'm not even counting this one since it went on my lid. But with these two, like I said, they just like ended up blending out like so far out, even though that wasn't my intention. And I don't know if the other mattes are going to perform like that, but I'm a little wary of using this palette now. And I feel like next time I use it, I'm going to make sure that I don't have like, again, I'm not going anywhere. I don't have anything to film after, just in case things get out of hand. I do feel like this is a different matte formula from their previous palettes because I do have a bunch of their previous palettes and the mattes in those palettes feel a bit thinner, a bit more sheer, and they didn't have this like overspreading, overblending issue that I had with these shades. But since I love these colors and tones so much, I do want to keep trying to use this palette and see whether it's just like something that there's a learning curve for, or I don't know. Sometimes I change my opinions on palettes as I continue to use them. So I'm going to keep using it and see how I feel about it. For this look, I'm going to be using the Davini Mingo palette, which I hope I'm not in the minority when I say that every time I see or think of the word Mingo, my mind automatically goes to the SNL Domingo skit. Like, it's just been playing in my head nonstop. But this is such a pretty summery palette, and I definitely want to do something combining both the pink and the green tones in one look. I'm going to start by picking up this pink matte over here. I'm running this throughout my crease, and I'm actually not super familiar with Davini's matte formula. I have some of the palettes, but I haven't used them like a ton. So what I'm noticing is that these mattes are very pigmented. Like that was one dip, and I'm probably not going to go back for another dip. I'm probably just going to keep blending this out until I'm happy with it. This eyeshadow looks more like a warm toned corally pink in the pan, but on me I feel like it's showing up slightly more cool toned than it looks in the pan, because I think you can see it's this shade over here and it just looks like slightly more warm toned versus on me, at least what I'm seeing here in real life in my mirror. And I think it's probably just like relative contrast with my skin tone being a bit on the warmer side. And I did go to the beach this past weekend and I got a bit of a tan, and when I tan I feel like I get more warm toned. Now I'm gonna grab this neon leaning pink over here. I'm packing this on the outer corner, like really packing on the pigment, because I noticed when I was swatching it that I don't know if this is technically a true neon or not, but I did notice that it kind of swatched like a neon, and I feel like with those, they work better when you pack them on like this and then softly blend out the edges. My God, I can't talk. And since I did do the other eye first, I actually found that this blended out very easily. Like I don't feel like I was losing pigment around the edge when I was blending it out, which can sometimes happen with neons. I'm also bringing it softly into that coral pink matte. Now I'm going to pick up this lime green shade over here. I'm starting by running that here on the inner part of my lower lash line. But as you can see, I'm going to start bringing it up in this direction. I'm also going to pack it on the inner corner first. I want this to be a super, super vibrant green shade, which is why I'm packing first, and then I'll just softly blend the edges. And then I'm also doing a matte inner swoop, which I feel like I usually do it shimmery, but I think I want to focus on the mattes for this palette. I do feel like I had to build this up a bit more than these mattes, but I think that might just have to do with my undertone being more olive. Now I'm going to take this shade over here, which I'm actually really excited about because it reminds me of this other shade that I reach for quite a lot because it has a super unique undertone. Let me show you. So it reminds me a lot of this matte in the Lethal Cosmetics Earth palette from their Avatar collab, which I feel like I don't see this undertone of green matte a lot. It has like a little bit of blue in it, but I would still consider it a green. And I feel like it's so unique, and I actually feel like I dip into this palette a lot for this shade. And you can see that the shade right over here, it's super, super close. I'm going to be running this color on the remaining portion of my lower lash line, really focusing the bulk of the pigment in the blank area first, and then taking whatever's left on the brush and blending it with the other colors. So I'm going to do this side first, but then I'm also going to take it just slightly into the pink, but very, very close to the corner of my eye here and up onto my upper lash line. I actually switched to a slightly smaller pencil brush, and I'm going to use that to kind of like smudge it here along my lash line, because these two colors don't blend, you know, super, super well together. When you mix them, it kind of becomes this murky, brownish grayish color. I don't know exactly what to call it, but I'm just gonna cheat a liner kind of, but not even, because I'm not bringing it all the way across my lid, just here on the outer corner. Now I'm gonna move on to shimmers, and I'm gonna start with this one over here. So I'm gonna run this over most of my lid, but I'm gonna leave the very outer corner blank for a different shimmer. But this shimmer is extremely soft. I picked it up on a brush because it's a little bit like it moves around in the pan just a little bit, and I didn't want to use too much pressure with my finger, and I just wanted more control over how much I was applying. It's also a little bit on the textured side, so you have to be a little careful about fallout if you're concerned about that, but it does smooth out really well on the lids, as you can see. I just keep working in really small amounts to also help with, you know, getting less fallout and not getting too much heavy shimmer built up on my lid. And I'm stopping the shimmer pretty much when I get to this neon pink matte on the outer corner. One of the reasons that I chose the shimmer is it has a pink reflect straight on, so it really does blend well with the pink mattes, but the base is more green and it also shifts to a green. So I just think that the colors in it work so well with the mattes that I have going on. And it's something that I really love about this color story is I feel like all the shimmers were really chosen with like the shifts and the tones matching the mattes. So now for the outer corner shimmer, I'm going to use this one over here, but just the tiniest amount because it has quite a deep base. I can hear some landscapers outside now, so I'm really sorry if that's translating into the audio, but I really don't have time to stop and wait for them to leave, so I'm just going to keep going. And like I said, I'm putting just the tiniest amount of this, really focusing it close to the lash line over here and kind of like melting it into that green matte that I brought around to the lash line. Then I'm slowly taking it outwards, trying to keep it on my mobile lid only. So like just out here to the edge. I don't know if that's really translating on camera, but also really softening the edge here since this is quite a dark green shimmer and I have a pink matte. And then slowly also feathering it into the other shimmer. I went back in for just a little bit more and I'm going to intensify the part closest to my lash line. So I just tilted my head back like this so that in my view, the light is not hitting my lid. And I noticed that there was a bit of a disconnect between this shimmer and this shimmer. So I'm just going ahead and putting that first shimmer down again so there's not like a blank spot. So I'm not one to do a brow bone highlight all the time, but I think I do want to do one today because I want to use this iridescent shade for a sheer wash of sparkle. I picked up a very, very light amount because I really don't want it to overtake the sparkles, and I'm just running it here along my brow bone at the very upper part of it. Dip back in one more time because this is a pretty textured shade and it's also another one that's a little loose in the pan, so I'd just rather work in thin light layers. Hopefully you can see it's just like a soft wash of sparkle up there. Here's the final look, and I'm really happy with how it turned out because I feel like I don't really do as much like contrasting mattes, at least when I'm filming for YouTube, because I'm still like nervous about messing up on camera. I don't know what it is. It's just like easier for me to do more complex looks off camera, but I'm really happy that I went for it. Here is the sparkle cam, although I should probably also call it the shift cam because I think you can see, yeah, this lid shade, the main lid shade goes from a pink to like this peachy orange to a green at an extreme angle, and then the outer corner shade shifts from like a more brassy goldish green to a more obvious green at an angle. And then you can also see the brow bone shimmer over here, which looks very soft, and it's how I wanted it, but still sparkly. Now let's talk about my thoughts on the palette. To me, this screams summer to me, especially because it is a pretty split pink and green color story, but with such warm and vibrant tones like this warm lime green, this punchy teal, the coral, the neon pink, even this like red leaning color over here, those all scream more summer to me than like a pink and green spring color story. And I'm really happy that this is available now in May because that means that if you choose to purchase this anytime soon, you will get it before summer starts, which I always appreciate when brands make their seasonal palettes available slightly before the season. And then with the shimmers, like I mentioned before, this shade over here specifically does really match the tones in this palette in that it's a pink shift straight on and it shifts to a green on a green base. So it's like perfectly matching shimmer. But then you also have shimmers that slightly contrast the tones in here. Like this one over here, it's a marbled pan, but when you mix it up all together, it's more of like this grayish, greenish tone with flecks of pink and red in there. So it does match the colors in this palette, but it also offers a little bit of contrast. Same with this one over here, which has a pink base, but those sparkles reflect a bit more of like a cool tone pink, almost a blue, not quite, but almost a blue. So I feel like it's a nice little contrast to the palette. So even though this is quite a split color story between the pink and green, I feel like there's such a variety in tones and depth as well to give you a good variety of looks. I feel like you're not going to get a bunch of like too similar looks with this palette. I also want to point out that this is a magnetic palette. This is Davini's first magnetic palette, so you won't be able to swap out the shades with her previous palettes, but you can rearrange this color story if you want and take out the pans to make BYOPs. As far as the texture for the shimmers go, this one up here, the one in the middle, and the one that I used on my lid today are all on the more like textured side. They're not quite flaky, but they do have quite a bit of texture, though they can be smoothed out so you don't get too much of like a flaky finish on your lid. And then this one, and this one are all very, very smooth shimmers. I also feel like the mattes were really easy to work with. I didn't spend too much time building them up or blending them out. As you saw, it took me like no time at all to do the matte work, which is really nice to see, especially because I feel like with mattes, it's one or the other. They'll either be easy to blend, but then you'll have to spend time building them up, or they go on super, super pigmented, but then you have to spend a lot of time blending them out. And I didn't have either of those issues with the mattes. I do want to point out that this matte over here is a sparkle matte, but not as much of a sparkle matte as I'm used to with some other brands. I feel like with other brands, the sparkles are super, super obvious and contrasting. And with this shade, I mean, you can't even really see it on camera. I feel like it's more of just like a dispersed, soft, I don't want to say white, but just kind of like a desaturated sparkle. I don't feel like it's going to show up as much as other sparkle mattes. All in all, I think this is a wonderful color story from Davini. It's definitely my favorite color story that I've seen from the brand so far. For this look, I am so excited to be using the Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 1 Jacob palette. It's such a mouthful, and it's one of those palettes that has the lenticular motion cover. I'm so excited to be using this because it's my first time getting PR from Glamlite. I have purchased many of their palettes in the past, but when they reached out to send me like a personalized package, I was very, very excited. As you can see, this is quite a neutral palette, so I think I want to try to use some of the greens paired with the neutrals and maybe do like a warm, cool tone split. So I'm going to start with this matte over here, and I'm just running this through the crease for a very light wash of definition. This type of neutral brown matte has a bit of like a khaki undertone, slightly olive leaning, honestly, which means that it's going to blend very well into my skin tone, but just give me that touch of definition that I want. And since it is close to my skin tone, I did have to dip in a second time to get a bit more pigment, but I feel like if you're lighter than me, then this will show up darker, of course. And also if you're not as olive toned. Now I'm going to pick up this green matte over here. So now I'm going to attempt to do this wing on this side, but I usually have to get pretty close to my mirror to do that. So we'll see how much of it I can capture on camera. I always start with drawing a liner along my lash line, usually keeping most of the pigment out here and then making it softer in here. Now comes the hard part with the wing, and I'm probably just not going to talk as I do this. I had to do a little bit of touching up with my mirror super close, and I definitely blocked my eye, but now I'm going to take it a little bit underneath the lower lash line, just about that much. This is not my best wing, but truthfully, the only people who are going to be seeing it this up close are you guys, so I don't think anyone in real life would really notice any mistakes. Next, I'm going to take this emerald green shimmer over here, which is such a standout shade to me because I feel like I don't have a lot of palettes or even singles that are this shade of green. It's so rich and jewel toned and emerald-like, and I feel like indies are usually not like a standard shimmer that's this pigmented. I feel like they usually have a shift to them, and sometimes I just want a regular shimmer. I'm going to be a little messy with this, like not super precise, and just kind of like smudge it along the liner, but a bit at a diagonal angle. So as I bring it outwards this way, I'm bringing it up at an angle, and I'm trying not to get it too much onto the matte, but as I get to like this portion of my crease, I want a little bit more definition there, so I'm kind of just feathering it out like this. Since it's such a deep shimmer, I feel like the little shadow from it is good as definition. I dipped back in one more time, and I'm packing it on again along the lash line to get more of that emerald color. Now I'm going to dip into this shimmer over here, another standout shimmer from the palette. This is the most sparkly shade in this palette. And with this shimmer, I'm basically filling in the rest of my lid that is bare. I'm working with very small, thin layers with this one because it is quite a piecey and loosely pressed shimmer, so I'm a little bit worried about fallout. It's a very interesting shimmer though because it's mostly cool toned. It has those silver sparkles as you can see, but there are also tiny gold flecks mixed in that give it just a little bit of contrast within the shimmer. It's so, so pretty. And as I meet the green shimmer, I'm making sure that the two blend just a little bit. So right now I feel like the look is pulling a bit more cool toned, and I want to add some warm tones. So for the lower lash line, I'm actually going to go in with this shimmer over here. Usually when I put shimmer on my lower lash line, I like to spray my brush to make sure... Oh my gosh, my dog's sleep barking again. I let her finish her dream out, and I also finished my lower lash line at the same time. But what I was saying was, usually when I put shimmers on my lower lash line, I like to spray the brush with setting spray to make sure that I don't get fallout, and also to make sure that the shadow sticks down properly, since I don't have eye primer down here. I just have my concealer set with powder. But this shimmer had such a fine particle size that there wasn't really any fallout, and it also had enough emollients to where it just kind of stuck down on its own just fine. Now for my inner corner, I actually want to dip into the Wedding highlighter from Glamlite that also came out with the Twilight collection, and you can see that it's this icy white shade. Up close it has a bunch of multicolored sparkles, but from a distance it just looks like an icy white, and I think it'll work really well with this look. This definitely makes for a very beautiful inner corner shade. I don't personally think that I would use this as a face highlighter because it is quite sparkly and has those multicolored sparkles, and I'm not so much of a highlighter person these days, and if I do, I feel like I just wear them so rarely that I don't know if I would end up using this as a cheek highlighter, and I feel like I go for something that's more like a overt color to complement the look that I have going on, and this is just like a bunch of different colors. Like I would have to wear a very simple eye look to want to wear something with multicolored sparkles on my cheeks. Here's the final look, and I really love how it turned out, but I also realized that I got so distracted by my dog's sleep barks because she's been doing them for years now, but every time it happens, I just like drop what I'm doing and I have to observe because it brings me so much joy. It's so fun and sweet to listen to her do that. So I forgot to mention something about my lower lash line shimmer. I used this one over here, and it is significantly less sparkly than the other shimmers in this palette. It's got more of like a bronzy satin base with copper and gold sparkles in it, which I think makes it really, really good for a lower lash line shimmer because it can give you some definition down here, which is like a slight sheen without being too sparkly. And speaking of sparkly, let me switch you over to the sparkle cam. I am so glad that you can see just how sparkly and special this look is. It is so stunning. I am very happy with this being my first look with the Jacob palette. It is everything I hoped it would be. I think you can also see the multicolored sparkle in the highlighter over here. Oh, it is gorgeous. Let me give you my thoughts on this palette. So if you were watching this launch, you'll know that Glamlite actually came out with two palettes, the Jacob palette and the Edward palette, which I also have here, and I will talk about it in a minute, but let me talk about this one first since I did the look with this one. This is definitely my favorite of the two palettes, and let me just show you it next to the Edward one so you can see how different they are. This is definitely more warm toned and neutral, but it's definitely my favorite of the two. I think that the shimmers in here are so pretty, and I love the range of mattes, but I do have a couple of gripes with this palette. I think with the mattes, this one up here and this one are far too close, and even close to this, like I could live with one of these two being in there along with this, because this one has more of, like I said, that khaki undertone, slightly olive, so it would pair well with this green, which is what I did today, but I would have loved to see one of these swapped out for more of like an overly mid-tone green matte, because we don't really have anything else to pair this dark green matte with. The only other light tone matte is up here, and I mean you could pair them together, but I just think it would have been nice to have a light green in here, especially when you consider that there are two green shimmers. I just feel like we didn't need all three of these like neutral brown mid-tone shades. They're just far too close to each other. I also personally could have lived without this black matte, especially because the Edward palette does have a black, and I think it makes sense for that. But with this palette, with how like soft some of these neutral tones are, I don't necessarily think this is like, I don't think it's necessary, especially because we have three other deepening up shades, so I don't feel like we need the black as well. But I know with officially licensed collabs, sometimes there are just, you know, constraints from the IP side, so maybe they had to go with like similar colors to make it more wolf-like. I don't really know why. I do think that there is a really good variety in the shimmers, considering that this is mostly a neutral palette. I like the two pops of green, and I like that they are different. This one is a very deep dark emerald green, like I showed you today, and this one is more of a duochrome on like a brown base, and it does have a shift to it, so I think it's really cool that they included a duochrome in here. For the remaining neutral shimmers, I think we have a really good variety of tone and depth so that none of them are too similar, which I really appreciate. So this one up here, like I said, is more of like a warm toned coppery type of shimmer, and it's very satiny. This one over here is less warm toned. It's more like a beigey champagne shade. This one over here is more of like, it has a bit of rosiness to it and it's a little taupey, but more brown, I would say, but still with that rosiness, if that makes sense. This one is very, very cool toned and a little bit darker. And then this one over here is lighter. In the pan, I feel like these two look a little similar, but this one's a lot lighter and it has that mix of cool and warm sparkles. And I will say that all of these shimmers, except for this one, are pretty sparkly. This is like the Garfield palette quality. If you've tried that palette, you know how special the shimmers are in there. Shout out to Juliet, mostly Matt, for turning me on to that. That is the whole reason I got interested in that palette, and these shimmers remind me of those Garfield shimmers. Quality-wise with the mattes, I thought they were really nice. They blended easily. They built up very easily, super pigmented. I haven't tried a ton of them. I am really curious about this gray shade over here, both of these grayish undertone shades. I want to use those next and see how they perform. But I mean, based on how these shades performed, and I also used the Edward palette for a short form tutorial, and I did use the gray mattes in that one. I feel like these are going to perform just fine. So now the Edward palette, this one did not speak to me as much as the Jacob palette when I first saw it, but now that I have it in my hands, I like it a lot more. My main gripe with this palette is that it just feels really similar to some of the other palettes that the brand already has that are kind of in this split cool and red color story. But I do think that there are a couple of things in this palette that are a little different. First of all, I don't know why there are there's this lavender shade in an Edward palette. I'm trying to rack my brain and figure out how that relates to Twilight, and my memory is just failing me, so maybe you can help me out in the comments. Things that I do like about this palette, this shimmer up here is so beautiful. It is a very intense and sparkly duochrome, and I love to see Glamlite doing this. I want to see more shimmers of this caliber. They don't even have to be like duochromes, but I want them to be this intense. And then the other shimmer that stood out to me is this one over here called Diamond, and it's this icy white shimmer with holographic sparkles all throughout, and they are quite a fine particle size, both the shimmer particles as well as the hollow particles. So you do have to be in direct light to see the holographic sparkles, but I think it makes so much sense for, Skin of a Killer, Diamond Skin, Vampire Skin. It makes perfect sense. Going back to things that don't quite hit the mark for me, these reds over here, first of all, this red shimmer over here is not the most sparkly. It's very intense, but it's not super sparkly, and I can't remember if I mentioned, I did actually use this palette for a short form tutorial that I'll link up here so you can go watch it. I did use this shadow and it performed well. It's just not as sparkly as the other shades. And then this matte down here, I just feel like it's more of a burgundy instead of a blood red. And so when you blend it out, it takes more of that pinkish hue to it, and I would have preferred something that was more blood red. Also, this shimmer over here is quite squishy. I think you can see that there's a little bit of a dent in the pan from swatching. I feel like the Jacob palette didn't have any squishy shimmers, but this one had a couple of shimmers that were a bit on the softer side. That's it for this video. I'm going to keep the outro pretty short because I am running late, but let me know which of the palettes you were most interested in, and also which of the looks was your favorite, because I feel like I did pretty different looks this time around, both in terms of color as well as technique. I didn't really do the same thing, so I'm curious which look was your favorite. As always, thank you so much for watching till the end. I always really, really appreciate it. I would also appreciate it if you could give this video a like before you go, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!